The land sat at the edge of the Coldwater River bottom in Quitman County, Mississippi, and nobody who looked at it in the spring of 2011 thought it was worth very much. 4,012 acres of low-lying clay ground, part timber, part cutover, part old cotton field that hadn't been worked in a decade. The timber was secondary hardwood, water oak, sweet gum, a little soft maple. Nothing a sawmill was going to get excited about. The soil survey listed half of it as Class 4 and Class V. 200 acres on the eastern edge sat inside a FEMA flood zone. The map was labeled Zone AE, which meant it flooded not occasionally but reliably, which meant flood insurance was not optional, which meant crop insurance on those acres was nearly impossible to structure. Delta Southern Agricultural Trust, a regional agricultural lender out of Greenville, had taken the property back from the family that borrowed against it in 2008 and couldn't service the note when cotton prices fell. They had carried it on their books as OREO, other real estate owned, for 3 years, which is bank language for a problem they needed to solve. They listed it through a land auction company out of Memphis in late September 2011 for a sealed bid sale closing on October 28th. Every professional who evaluated it said the same thing. Wet, poorly drained, mixed timber value. The eastern parcels were a liability before you even considered the farming ground. One agricultural consultant from Tunica County put the upside at $680 an acre for the best ground and suggested the buyer budget for tile drainage on at least 800 acres before expecting profitable row crop production. At the bid closing, 3 offers came in. The bank's internal reserve was $590 an acre. 4 offers came in. Actually, the 4th was from a girl named Celestine Waters, who was 14 years old, who lived with her grandmother Mavis on 68 acres that shared a fence line with the eastern edge of the property in question. And Celestine Waters had told the bank in a letter that they were about to make a mistake. Nobody at Delta Southern Agricultural Trust read that letter very carefully. Somebody had to write this one down, or it would have been forgotten. If you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, take a second to subscribe before we go any further. The rest of it matters. The Waters family had farmed those 68 acres since 1946, when Celestine's great-grandfather Elmore Waters paid $3,400 cash for the ground after coming back from the Pacific and refusing to sharecrop. The deed was recorded in the Quitman County Courthouse on March 14, 1946, and it passed through the family twice since. Celestine's grandmother Mavis had inherited it from her father in 1983. The family had grown cotton, then soybeans, then shifted to a small cow-calf operation, about 40 head of Angus Hereford Cross, that Mavis ran with help from a neighbor named Dwight Presley, who had a tractor and a disc and would work for ground rent. The 68 acres were paid free and clear. They had been paid free and clear since 1971. Celestine had grown up on those 68 acres. She had walked the fence line with her grandmother since she was small enough to walk under the bottom wire without bending. She knew the way the ground moved water. She knew which draws ran fast and which ones backed up. She knew that the eastern edge of the 4,000 acres, the Zone AE ground the consultants were worried about, did not actually flood the way the map said it did. Not anymore. Because she had watched it not flood for 4 years. And she knew why. Mavis Waters had a notebook. It was a green cloth-covered composition book, and it had been started by Elmore and passed down, each generation adding to it, and by the time Celestine was 11, she was the one making the entries. Rainfall dates, flood crests, where the water went, how long it stood. On February 19, 2007, Celestine had written, "Water came up to the second post east of the corner. Gone in 14 hours. Did not cross fence." On March 3, 2008, heavy rain. Cold water came up. Did not reach the bean field. Ground drained south before it backed up. On April 2, 2010, biggest rain I've seen. No standing water on east parcels of the Hartley ground by next morning. Drained through the culvert the highway department put in on Route 3 in 2006. That culvert. That was the thing. In 2006, the Mississippi Department of Transportation had replaced a failing box culvert on State Route 3 with a 72-inch corrugated steel pipe culvert, deeper set, with a different hydraulic profile. The replacement changed the drainage gradient on the entire eastern watershed. The water that used to back up against the Hartley ground in a wet spring now moves south and east faster than the FEMA model, which had been built on pre-2006 hydrology, expected. The flood zone designation had not been updated. The map still said AE. The land still carried flood insurance requirements. But the actual flood risk, the real world, stand here and watch the water move risk, had changed. Celestine knew this because she had watched it. She had written it down. Elmore Waters had started that notebook because a man who can prove what he saw is harder to argue with than a man who only remembers it. Celestine understood that by the time she was 12. She was not tall for her age. She wore glasses that were slightly too big for her face because her grandmother bought them a size up so she'd grow into them. She had a habit of writing things down in the margins of whatever notebook was in her hand, observations about the weather, about the cattle, about things that didn't seem right. And she had a habit of reading things that grown people assumed she wouldn't understand. She had read the FEMA flood zone determination letter when it came in the mail in 2003, and had asked her grandmother what AE meant. Mavis had explained it. Celestine had written it in the notebook. Not precocious, exactly, not performing, just paying attention in the way that her great-grandfather had paid attention. Because the ground he owned was the only thing he'd ever had that no one could take without a fight, and paying attention to it was how you kept it. She had written to Delta Southern Agricultural Trust in August of 2011 when the property first came on the market. The letter was 2 pages. It explained the culvert replacement. It explained the drainage change. It included the dates from the notebook where the eastern parcels had not flooded when the FEMA model said they should have. It said, in the 3rd paragraph, that the flood zone designation was incorrect as of 2006, and that any buyer who did the proper hydrological survey would likely be able to get a letter of map amendment from FEMA that would remove those 200 acres from Zone AE, which would eliminate the flood insurance requirement and open those parcels to standard crop insurance. It said, in the last paragraph, that she intended to bid on the property, and that she was telling them this because she thought they should know before they set their reserve. A loan officer at the bank named Preston Aldrich received the letter. He read the 1st paragraph and noted that it was from a 14-year-old girl. He filed it. He did not call. He did not send it to the agricultural consultant from Tunica County. He set the reserve at $590 an acre and moved on. There were 3 professional bids. The highest was $601 an acre from a land investment partnership out of Clarksdale. The partnership planned to lease the farming ground to a cotton producer, manage the timber passively, and hold the eastern parcels unfarmed because of the flood designation. Celestine Waters bid $619 an acre. She had 4,200s in a savings account that her grandmother had helped her open at 9 years old. She had $11,800 that she had earned over 4 years doing custom heifer work for 2 neighboring cow-calf operations, pregnancy checking, vaccinating, running the cattle through the squeeze chute alongside Dwight Presley, who had taught her the work and vouched for her to the neighbors. She had a commitments letter from her grandmother Mavis for an additional $30,000, which was the sum Mavis had kept in a CD at the Quitman County Bank since 1997. And she had a loan commitment from a Usta Farm Service Agency beginning farmer loan for the remainder of the purchase price, which a FISA loan officer named Dorothy Keene out of the Marks, Mississippi field office had spent 11 weeks helping her structure after Celestine had walked into that office in June with a notebook and the letter and her flood zone research and laid it all on the desk and said she needed help figuring out how to buy something. Dorothy Keene had seen a lot of young people walk through that door over 22 years. She said later she had never seen one come in with their own hydrology argument. The total bid was $2,482,028. It was $18 an acre above the next highest offer. Delta Southern Agricultural Trust accepted it on October 28, 2011. Preston Aldrich processed the paperwork. He did not connect the buyer's name to the letter in his files until closing, and by then there was nothing to say. Not cruel. Just a man who had been wrong about a piece of ground, and about the person who saw it clearly and didn't know the half of it yet. Celestine and her grandmother closed on the 4,012 acres on December 9, 2011. Celestine was 15 by then. She'd had her birthday on November 3rd. Mavis had driven her to the closing in Greenville in a 2004 Ford F-250 that had 211,000 miles on it and pulled to the left. Celestine wore a green dress and her two big glasses and brought the notebook. She filed for a FEMA letter of map amendment on the eastern parcels in January of 2012 using a hydrological survey completed by a civil engineering firm in Hernando for $4,800. The LOMA was granted on March 17, 2012. The 200 acres were removed from Zone AE. The flood insurance requirement was eliminated. The standard crop insurance became available. By the spring of 2013, Celestine and Mavis had leased the farming ground, 1,840 acres of it, to a cotton and soybean operation out of Coahoma County at $140 an acre per year. That was $257,600 annually. The timber ground they enrolled in a Mississippi Forestry Commission cost-share program and began converting the secondary hardwood to longleaf pine, which would not be commercially valuable for 15 years, but which Celestine had decided was the right tree for that ground. She had read about longleaf restoration in a bulletin from the Natural Resources Conservation Service. She was 15 years old. She is 28 now. She runs a 4,080-acre operation in Quitman County. She sold 68 acres of the original Waters ground in 2019 to fund a second phase of timber conversion. A decision she said was harder than anything else she'd done because it was Elmore's original ground, and she felt she owed him an explanation. The longleaf stands on the eastern parcels are coming into their second decade. The cattle herd has grown from 40 head to 310 head. She employs 4 people full-time. She has a bees and agricultural business from Mississippi State and has been back to speak at the SAW office in Marks twice, because Dorothy Keene, who retired in 2020, asked her to. There's something she says when people ask her how she did it. She says she didn't do anything special. She says she watched the water, and she wrote it down. She says her great-grandfather taught her grandmother, and her grandmother taught her that land talks to you if you're quiet enough to hear it, and that a notebook is how you prove to other people what you already know. Elmore Waters died in 1979. He never saw those 4,000 acres. He never knew about the culvert on Route 3 or the Loma or the longleaf pines coming up along the eastern draws. But he started the notebook in 1946 with a date and a weather observation on the first page. And the habit of it traveled through 3 generations to a girl with 2 big glasses who walked into a USTA field office with her evidence and asked for help. He was the one who won that day. He was the one who bought that ground.